Welcome back to my Road to No Way Home series. This is episode 6, where I will be covering Spider-Man Homecoming, the first MCU Spider-Man movie. As per my other episodes in this series, they will all be spoiler reviews. This series in general is where I have taken it upon myself, with the upcoming release of Spider-Man No Way Home, to go back and rewatch every live-action Spider-Man movie and do a review on it, because I felt like it would be fun. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about Spider-Man Homecoming, which personally for me is my second favorite Spider-Man movie of all time. It is really fun, and the only one that tops it is Into the Spider-Verse, because that is just a phenomenal movie and a spectacular Spider-Man movie. It is just the peak Spider-Man cinema until maybe the second one comes out next year. So, for the time being, it is what it is. It's peak Spider-Man. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Spider-Man Homecoming. And man, this movie's just so good. Like, I literally just sat through the whole movie with like smile on my face, getting excited, rewatching the scenes that I knew were coming. It, that's a really good thing that a movie can do, when it can make you feel excited for stuff that you already know is going to happen. I think that's great. It's a perfect job on a movie standpoint. If it's like, hey, you know what's going to happen, so you can still get excited from it, as opposed to like, oh, okay, I know what's going to happen now. I'm losing interest in rewatching the movie. So it's a good thing. Spider-Man Homecoming definitely has great rewatchability. Personally, in my opinion, I believe Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man, at least in live action. Best Spider-Man in general, I'd probably say is the Spectacular Spider-Man from the animated series. But Tom Holland, for live action, is the best Spider-Man. I feel like he encapsulates both halves of the character. He's really good and quirky as Spider-Man, and then he's also really good at playing the invisible nobody. So, really like his portrayal of Spider-Man, and I'm looking forward to seeing him for the coming years as the character. So let's get into the story. What is Spider-Man Homecoming about? Obviously you probably know, mostly because this movie came out, 2017? It's been like 4 years now, so you probably know what it's about, but hell, I'm going to explain it anyway. Um, in Spider-Man Homecoming, it takes place 2 months after the events of Captain America Civil War. Peter is pining to become an Avenger, and Tony's kind of more or less blacklisted him. He told Peter just be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and that's more or less what he's doing. He's just running around, helping people around Queens and New York in general, just living the small scale life, until he happens to come across Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture. He, just by happenstance, runs across one of their weapons deals, because Adrian Toomes was formerly a construction worker who did damage control for the alien crises that happened and the huge battles and everything throughout the MCU. He was a man who was taking apart and cleaning up the mess from the first Avengers movie that happened back in 2012, and then Tony created damage control in order to clean up after all the superhero messes that happened. So Adrian Toomes and all of his workers were immediately fired on their first day doing this job. So after that, they took the alien technology that they had left over, created themselves some supervillain tech, and they became thieves, stealing alien tech and high-tech things from all of the battles that happened over the course of the MCU. I really think this is a great incorporation that expresses, how people change as a result of everything that's happened throughout the course of the MCU as a whole. And also, it's understandable. You can relate to Adrian Toomes as a character and understand how he got to this point. Because Adrian Toomes, he has a wife, he has a daughter, so he wants to take care of them, and losing his job immediately on the first day after he just spent all of this money to get it prepped is damaging. So I really love his character and I understand it. So, as I mentioned, Peter comes across one of his weapons deals, and that's what puts him at odds. So Peter spends the rest of the movie trying to take down the Vulture so he can prove to Tony/Iron Man that he is worthy of being an Avenger, and trying to get Tony's notice. That's the movie in a nutshell. Peter's trying to stop the Vulture to become an Avenger. In a sweet, short sentence. But this movie is extremely charming, the whole way through. I just loved it. Goofy smile and all, just sitting there, just enjoying the movie. It's just fun. It's just fun 100% of the time. There's never a moment that I wasn't enjoying myself, even when there were serious moments, even with comedic moments, action scenes. Just 100% of the time always having a good time, because this movie really gets Spider-Man as a character and understands his dynamics with all the people in his life. I think Marissa Tomei is the best Aunt May we've had on screen, at least for this movie particularly. Um, Aunt May is great in this movie. They gave her a new take, because Aunt May typically in the comics and the previous movies is an older woman, but in this movie she's a lot younger. So they kind of play with the joke that since Marissa Tomei is attractive, they're like, oh hey, people are always hitting on Aunt May, and she just kind of ignores it, which I like. It's a very subtle way of showing that Ben Parker was the love of her life. So she doesn't really take much to it until Far From Home, but I'll get to that in Far From Home. Um, she is fantastic and lovable as Peter's Aunt May. They have a lot of good chemistry with them, even in the few scenes that she has in the movie. And when, calls for emotional moments, she really brings it, because she's a fantastic actress. So I really love her and Tom Holland's chemistry in the movie. She does a fantastic job. Something else that is fantastic about this movie is this movie does a great job of portraying Tony Stark as a complete and total asshole. Like, that in the previous movies, but, usually it's like Iron Man or something like that. You see it from his perspective most of the time. So, like, yeah, Tony is a jerk, but at the same time, he is, trying to do better. You understand, you can empathize with his character and you can like him. But this is the first time you see his perspective, outside of a team movie like The Avengers, but even in a team movie like The Avengers, his perspective is still given. This movie is told from Peter's perspective. So when he sees Tony, he still idolizes Tony, but you, as the audience watching how Tony acts towards Peter, are like, yo, this dude's a scumbag. Why do you like this guy? Which, from what I've heard, Peter doesn't like Tony in the comics. I can't speak for that personally. I haven't really read enough Spider-Man comics to see him and Tony interact in the comics, but I have heard that Tony and Peter don't get along very much, which, to be honest, I kind of get it. Like, if this is true, their characters are very different. Peter is the everyman. He likes to help, the innocent bystander, while Tony is very flamboyant and out there. He does things on a grand scale. So I could very much see how the two of them clash in ideologies. Like, Peter, for his whole life, has always wanted to be a scientist who can help people. And Tony originally started off his life by creating weapons. Like, the two of them have a very polar opposite. Tony hates his dad. He loves his dad, but they had a rocky relationship, so he kind of hates him a little bit. And Peter always loved his aunt and uncle, so they're very different as characters. But in the MCU, Peter idolizes Tony, which makes sense because obviously Peter's a superhero and Tony's a superhero. He wants to be a superhero like Iron Man, who's respected by everyone and is this ultra star hero. But also, as a scientist, Tony is like the world's smartest person at the moment. I believe in the future they're going to be releasing a show on Disney Plus with the actual smartest character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I'll get to that way down the line when that character is finally introduced. But Peter idolizes Tony and he wants to be like him, which is understandable, But at the same time, Peter's rose tinted glasses are like hiding Tony's jerk assholeness from him. But you, as the audience, you see it and you're just like, oh, why do you like Tony Stark, dude? Like, he's kind of sucks. Like, why do you like it? Even Aunt May says it later on in the movie. Her and Peter are having dinner, and Aunt May's just like, that Tony Stark, never really liked that guy. And it just feels like Homecoming was setting up that Peter and Tony would have a rift between them at the end of the movie. It doesn't happen, which I kind of think it should have, but I'll get to that later. More into more positive aspects of the movie. This movie is hilarious. Personally, I found it incredibly funny through the small moments. Like, every actor in the movie does a fantastic job. Like, from the main leads to the extras who just show up for comedic moments. Like, there's this one character who just runs past at like the end of a hallway wearing a mascot costume because he's always late to something. It's hilarious. This movie does a great job with comedy. It's fantastic. It's a teen comedy movie with Spider-Man in it. It's awesome. Love it. 100%. Awesome. I said it so many times, but I'll say it again. It's awesome. Love it. Anyway, moving on. I also love the direction of this movie. There's some shots in this movie that are very beautiful, which I'll talk about one shot in particular towards the end of this video. But a lot of shots in this movie. I also love how they use Spider-Man's abilities plus the direction to tell jokes as well. Because, the scene where like someone's like leaning off of something and they drop something and like, oh no, I can't let that fall, and like hit the ground, and they like lean over and grab it, and then it like pans back and you see someone like caught them before they fell off. But in this case, no one catches Peter. They shoot it as if someone did catch him, and when it pans back to the other side of the screen, you just see that Peter used his abilities to stick to the side of a balcony so he could catch his web shooter that he dropped, and I found that really funny. It's something very small, but something that I personally enjoyed that they did with the direction. I really love that Peter just uses his powers when he's in private, like when he's hanging out with Ned, he's just kind of like walking on the walls and messing around. Ned wears his mask in one scene and everything like that. It's great. But now, to get into the more nitty gritty, I'm going to focus up a little bit and talk about individual characters. I already talked about how Tony Stark is an asshole in this movie, but I'm going to focus more on why he is this way and something that they don't really touch on in this movie that I think they really should have. So, Tony is he's kind of Peter's mentor, because he doesn't really teach Peter anything. He told Peter to stay close to the ground, not deal with any supervillains, to just tell him and Happy, and they'll deal with it. But Tony doesn't really communicate with Peter at all. Every time Peter contacts Happy, whether it be through text or call, like 99% of the time, it goes straight to voicemail or it's an unresponded message. However, Tony, in a small bit of kindness, actually does take in all of that information, which is shown in the scene where Peter called Happy and told him about his day, how he like went around, he stopped a bike thief, he helped an old lady cross the street and gave her directions, and she bought him a churro for it. And they bring it up later on where Tony is talking to him and he's like, hey kid, you know what, why don't you just stick to the ground, leave the crazy monster man alone, you helped out that lady, she gave you a churro. So Tony does care somewhat. However, they never addressed the fact that Tony had to earn that level of care for Peter. He doesn't really show it often because, like I said, Tony Stark is a jerk, so he doesn't really answer Peter's calls. He doesn't talk to him often. He doesn't like personally mentor him one-on-one. He just leaves Peter to do what he wants and wants him to stay small scale. However, Tony didn't recruit Peter to be a superhero because he respected Peter. That is not the reason he got Peter. The reason that Tony recruited Peter in the first place is because he needed an army of superheroes to beat the crap out of Captain America's army of superheroes. That's it. That's the reason he got Peter in the first place. And then he found out later on that, Peter's genius, he's like him in many ways, and that he has a ton of respect for him, that he should, maybe nurture Peter into being a hero that can supersede him one day, which that's fine. But they never bring up the fact that Tony recruited Peter because he just needed an army of superheroes. That's something that's never touched on in the franchise, which I think it really should have, because I feel like Peter as a person should have had a problem with the fact that Tony recruited him to beat up a bunch of superheroes, but he never has that issue. They never touch on it in the Spider-Man franchise. It's Tony's a jerk to Peter in the first movie, and then in the second movie, he's dead because it's after Endgame. So Tony's always seen in this rose-tinted glass, this perfect light in Peter's eyes, and I really feel like Peter should have had more of a problem with that, because due to Tony's lack of communication with Peter, because of how much of a jerk he is, Peter ends up going after the Vulture, and that leads to the fantastic ferry sequence where Peter gets into a fight with the Vulture and the ferry gets split in half. I have problems with this sequence, but I'm going to get to that in a second. Peter goes after him unaware that Tony called the FBI. Now, why didn't Tony tell Peter he took his information to heart and called the FBI? There's no reason for it, except for the fact that Tony is a jerk. And he's just like, oh, okay, the kid told me there's like a minor supervillain. All right, I'll call the FBI. That's the end of it. Why wouldn't you tell him that? Like, why would you tell him that? That's the equivalent of you picking up somebody food before they cook themselves dinner. And then you show up and you see them cooking dinner. And it's like, oh, man, my bad. I got you lunch because like I heard you was hungry, and it's just like, why'd you tell me that? It's like, well, I mean, like, I don't know. I don't have a good reason for not telling you that. I like it's like that. That's the equivalent of it. Tony should have told Peter this, but you wanna know why he didn't? Because Tony's a jerk. He doesn't respect Peter enough to do that. Like it's constantly shown throughout the movie that Tony put in a bunch of protocols in Peter's suit that disabled all the different gadgets and everything that actually put in there, which small sidetrack. I don't like the fact that Peter has all of these different modes and like he has his own version of Jarvis called Karen in his suit and all the. Spider-Man is a poor superhero. He's a poor man. It's a constant thing that happens in Peter's life. He's extremely poor. He makes his own web fluid, which he still does that in this movie, but that's it. He has his webs, he has his powers, and then he invents some things that he uses, like his spider tracer and his like spider signal. He invents those himself. That's pretty much it. That's all Peter has as a character. But in this movie, he has the Stark suit and Karen and all these different modes and everything like that. And it's just like, he's not Iron Man. He doesn't need all of this. Please stop. Like what makes it worse is that I don't remember Peter using any of these things, with the exception of Endgame, where he used kill mode in his Iron Spider suit. But I can't remember Peter really using all of these extra things or even having Karen in his suit in the future. I know he gets a new suit in Far From Home, which may be why, because Peter redesigned it and took out all the extra crap that he didn't need. But I don't know. It's just that I feel like Peter didn't need all this stuff. But back to Tony Stark. There's no reason Tony shouldn't have told Peter the FBI was showing up to stop Adrian Toomes. So Peter goes there, big mess happens, and then he gets angry at Peter for not listening to him, and he takes back the Spider-Man suit. It's a really good scene. It's very impactful. I did like the parallel between the scene earlier where Tony saves Peter, and then he isn't actually there. He just sent a remote Iron Man suit to go and help him out. And then in this scene, Peter's upset, and he's just like, if you actually cared about me, you'd actually be here. And the suit opens up, and Tony's inside, and I'm like, oh, okay, wow, that was really cool. That was actually an impactful scene. It added a lot of tension to the moment. Did like it. But Tony Stark is a jerk in this movie. I really wish it kind of ended with him and Peter having some kind of split between the two of them, which is something I did read an article about, saying that that's going to happen between Peter and Doctor Strange in the upcoming No Way Home. So I kind of wish that relationship would have happened in Homecoming, but aside from that, it doesn't really matter. Like outside of that, like nitpick that I have, everything about their dynamic throughout the movie is great. It's fantastic, as I've said many, many, many times throughout the course of this video. Next character, Ned. He's cool. That's it. He's Peter's best friend. He's a comic relief. He's really smart. I like him. I've heard that in the comics, Ned does become the Hobgoblin. I don't know if that's ever going to happen in the movies, but it is what it is. Ned's just a fun character. He's really funny. I do like the fact that him knowing that Peter is Spider-Man adds a lot of these funny moments, and for newcomers to the series, it gets them to learn more about Spider-Man, instead of like going through the entire origin story again. I'm going to touch on this a bit because I know a lot of people have a problem with it in the MCU. Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben is not really referenced in either Spider-Man movie. Uncle Ben's, like, the most Uncle Ben is referenced is that in Far From Home, Peter has a suitcase that has BP on it, I believe. It has Uncle Ben's initials on it. And then in this movie, when Ned finds out that Peter's Spider-Man, he's like, dude, we have to tell everybody. This is so cool. You're Spider-Man. He's like, Ned, no, I can't tell anybody. He's like, your aunt doesn't even know. No, she doesn't know. And he's like, I can't tell her. After everything she's been through, I can't let her know, okay? And it's like, okay, yeah, that's in reference because Uncle Ben would have recently been shot. Actually, that past year, now that I'm thinking about it, because Disney Plus is releasing an animated series called Spider-Man Freshman Year, which means Peter would have gotten his powers in his freshman year of high school, and Homecoming takes place in his sophomore year. So that would mean that Uncle Ben literally died the previous year in the MCU. Okay. That's cool. I never really thought much about that until just now. I like that. Anyway, but yeah, Ned, fun. I enjoy him. Liz Toomes, the daughter of the Vulture. I like her. She is Peter's love interest for the whole movie. She's charming. The brief moments that she exchanges with Peter, they do have good chemistry. And the reveal that she is Adrian Toomes' daughter is awesome, and I love that entire sequence that the two of them have there. Peter is just like in such a state of shock that her dad is the Vulture that he just zones out and is just hyper focused on Adrian the entire time he's around him. There's just a really funny moment where Peter's just staring at Adrian, and Liz walks up to Peter and she's just like, "Oh, is that a corsage?" And he's just like, "Yeah," and he just keeps staring at the Vulture, and she's like, "Oh, well, thanks." And then they take a picture, and like everybody's looking this way at the camera and they're smiling, and Peter's just like staring at Adrian. It's great. Love it. Love it. Spectacular. I said spectacular. So fantastic this time. Anyway, so really good. Like I mentioned, Adrian Toomes. The only gripe I probably have with Adrian Toomes, moving from Liz, she doesn't really have much to offer except being Peter's love interest in the movie. She's well written enough, so she doesn't just come off as just annoying. Like she's just literally around, just be Peter's love interest. She is a person in her own right. Onto Adrian Toomes, I'll talk about him a little bit more because I talked about him earlier. The only gripe I probably have with his character throughout the whole movie is that he finds being a killer way too easy for his humble beginnings. Like Adrian Toomes was a construction worker before he became the Vulture. However, he's just a thief as the Vulture. He doesn't really kill people to steal everything that he needs, yet when he accidentally kills the Shocker, he's just like, kill him. And he has no problem trying to kill a 15-year-old who happens to be a superhero. So, I mean, it's a small nitpick, but the movie is just so great as a whole, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Like, another nitpick you could probably have about the whole movie is that Peter's bedroom window opens weird. Is that most windows open from the bottom up, but Peter's window opens from the top down, which doesn't make any sense in regards to a window, but at the same time, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because the rest of the movie is fine. So, I just let it slide. But speaking of Peter and speaking of the Vulture, I gotta talk about one of my favorite scenes in the movie, which is when Liz and Adrian are going to homecoming. So they're driving in the car, and Peter's just like super concerned, and he's just like staring at Adrian. He doesn't really know what to say, and Liz is just trying to like have a conversation with him. She's being all cute and like showing him stuff on her phone, and like innocently she's just telling her dad about Peter. But the information that she gives to her dad helps Adrian figure out that Peter is Spider-Man in like 5 seconds. She's like, "Oh yeah, Dad, Peter works for Tony Stark. He has an internship with him." And he's like, "Oh, really?" She's like, "Yeah, he even met Spider-Man." He's like, "Yeah, yeah, he's a cool guy, solid dude." And they're like, "Oh, really? Okay." And then it's just like, "Peter, you were in DC with my daughter. You weren't scared up in that elevator." And he's like, I wasn't in the elevator. I saw everything from the ground." And Adrian's just like, "Uh-huh. Okay." And then Liz is like, "Yeah, and then, Peter, you're always disappearing. Like, you disappeared from my party the other night." He's like, what? Liz, shut up. I didn't disappear from your party." And then, like, it clicks in Adrian's head, and they're, like, at a stoplight, and the light's red, and he's just like, "Yeah, your good old buddy Spider-Man." And the light turns green, which is the Vulture's color, and it just, like, it just shines on his face. It's just this menacing shot. Love it. And then the dad talk that he has with Peter afterwards, he just pulls out a gun after Liz gets out the car, and he's just like, "Now listen, kid, you're gonna stay out of my affairs." He's like, "What? I don't know what you're talking about." He's like, "Okay, so my daughter doesn't know that you're Spider-Man. That's good. But stay out of my affairs, or I'll kill you, and I'll kill everybody you love. Don't mess with me, kid. I like you, I respect you, and this is the one chance that I'm giving you. Go in there and have a good time with my daughter." And it's just like, which leads to another scene that I very much love, which is my favorite, like, Spider-Man running suit up sequence, which is when Peter leaves, whatever. Peter leaves Liz at the homecoming dance, and he's just like running through the hall. He's like pulling his tie off, opening his shirt, grabbing his Spider-Man costume. I thought that was really cool. And then him not being able to fully suit up quick leads him to have a cool fight with the Shocker. It's not very long, but Peter ends up getting into a fight with the Shocker as he's trying to head to stop Adrian Toomes. My bad. The Shocker 2, the second Shocker. I forgot what his name is. I forgot what both of their names are, but anyway, it's the black guy. The bald black guy, he's the second Shocker. He's cool. They get into a fight, and Peter drops his web shooter, so he ends up getting saved by Ned, which I thought was nice. I enjoyed that. And then he goes off to go and fight Adrian Toomes by stealing Flash Thompson's car, which was a very satisfying scene because Flash Thompson is just a dick throughout this whole movie. And speaking of Flash Thompson, I didn't really talk much about him. He's like a side character. He bullies Peter. That's about it. But I do like the take that they went with Flash Thompson because usually Flash Thompson is your typical jock bully in the comics and like every other Spider-Man media. But in this, they reinvent the character for a modern age. Instead of Flash being like this super brolic football dude, bro, who's super dumb that beats up Peter because he thinks he's a nerd, Flash is just someone who's more popular than Peter, so he finds Peter ridiculous for being lame and makes fun of him for it, which I really did enjoy. He still comes off as the same level of jerk, but instead of Peter being physically abused by Flash, he is just psychologically abused by him because of all of the jokes that he tells about him, which I enjoyed. I thought their reinvention of Flash Thompson was pretty cool. I enjoyed it a lot. Although, now this is just me as a comic book fan, I can't see this version of Flash becoming Agent Venom. Just, if you don't know, in the comics, at one point in time, Flash Thompson does bond with the Venom symbiote after he loses his legs in war and he becomes the superhero, well, anti-hero called Agent Venom. I cannot see this version of Flash Thompson becoming Agent Venom. Like, this version of Flash Thompson, he's popular, but he's kind of a dork. I can't see him being like this military man who, gets his legs blown off and then becomes Agent Venom. I don't see it. Now, if they do it in the future and it works, I'll be fine with it, but as of right now, I don't really see this version of Flash Thompson being that character. Anywho, time to talk about something that I'm going to end this video fairly soon, so time to talk about the good stuff. Now, at the end of this movie, there is a very impactful scene that I think is one of the best Spider-Man scenes, probably one of the best movie scenes I've seen, that I touched on in the Amazing Spider-Man 1 video that I made. It is the birth of Spider-Man and the origin of a character in general. So I mentioned in the Amazing Spider-Man video that there are three superhero movies that came out that regressed characters to then give them an origin story to make them the iconic characters that we know them to be in their comic book iterations, like in Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and in The Amazing Spider-Man. All three of those movies regress the personality traits of Clark Kent, Bruce Wayne, and Peter Parker to a degree that they're basically unrecognizable as the characters that we, as the audience who have seen the shows and the comics, etc., know them to be, and then they go through an arc in the movie to become the character that we know that they should be from the comics or whatever you've seen them from. And I really hate that trope. It's very stupid in my opinion, regardless of the fact that I like the scene where Peter officially becomes Spider-Man in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's a really well-made scene. Everything leading up to it was bad. And I feel the same way about Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. However, the one exception to this is Spider-Man Homecoming. You see, Peter's whole thing is with great power comes great responsibility. However, Peter in this movie is completely unfocused. He is only focused on becoming an Avenger, and because of that, his life starts falling apart. But he doesn't really care because he thinks once he gets everything sorted out, he'll become an Avenger. He'll leave school, he'll leave his friends, he'll leave his aunt, he'll just be this awesome superhero. He'll get paid for it, he doesn't need to worry about anything like that. And that mentality causes Peter to shirk his responsibilities. He ends up dropping all of his extracurriculars. He isn't really hanging out with Ned all that much. He's worrying Aunt May. He's starting to get in trouble a lot in school. And this leads Peter's life to crumble. And it all starts with something that I thought was really nice. At the beginning of the movie, Peter goes to a sandwich shop. And it's his favorite sandwich shop. And because of Peter's hubris when stopping some criminals, he ends up getting that sandwich shop destroyed. From that point forward, you see Peter's life slowly fall apart, leading up to the big confrontation that he has with Adrian Toomes. And, I'm sorry, I'm just really thinking about how great this scene is. It's just so good. But I will talk to it now and why I think it's the perfect representation of a birth of a superhero scene. Because throughout the rest of the movie, Peter still acts like Peter Parker. He still acts like Spider-Man when he is those two, respectively. However, unlike those other movies, his character isn't regressed. Like I said, he still feels the way he's supposed to feel. I'm not sitting in the movie going like, why is he doing this stupid stuff? This character wouldn't do this. And then it's like, oh, I get it, because you regressed him to build him up to be the character that I know he should be. That's stupid. I hate that. Homecoming doesn't feel that way. Peter feels like Peter, Spider-Man feels like Spider-Man, respectively, and then it leads up to him becoming the hero that we know him to truly be. Because Peter focuses at the end of the movie because he only has himself to rely on, and he fully accepts his role as Spider-Man, as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He stops focusing about being an Avenger. He stops, doing everything wrong. He focuses on what is important, what his responsibilities are, and that's how he truly wins the fight and becomes Spider-Man. So the scene that I'm talking about, which if you've seen the movie, you probably already know, it's the scene where Peter gets crushed literally and metaphorically. His world crumbles down on him as a building drops on top of him by Adrian Toomes. Peter goes to fight the Vulture in a warehouse, and as they get into a fight, he's giving him this talk, which Michael Keaton did a fantastic job in this villain speech where he relates to Peter. It's great, love it. And as that speech goes on, he's like, "Why are you giving me this speech, Adrian?" He's like, "Well, because I was just buying time for my wings to kick in." And then his wings show up, and they cut through all the scaffolding in the building. And Peter's like, "You didn't hit me." And he's like, "I wasn't trying to." And the building collapses on Peter. So Peter's entire world collapses on him. All the mistakes he's made throughout the course of the movie have led him to this moment where this building is crushing him to death. He can't escape. He starts freaking out. And this is the moment where you remember that although he's a superhero, Peter Parker in this movie is only 15 years old. He's still a teenager. So when he gets this building crushing him, he starts freaking out. He rips his mask off because he can't breathe properly. He's like, "Help, anybody, please, somebody, anybody help me." He's freaking out. He's losing all sense that he has. And then this shot, my favorite shot from any Spider-Man movie, Peter pulls off his mask, and when he throws it away so he can breathe, it ends up falling in a pool of water. And half of his mask is in the water, and the other half is submerged. So as Peter's freaking out, he looks in front of him, and he sees his mask in the water, and the water reflects back at him, which is it's a really nice cover shot that happens in Spider-Man comics where half is Spider-Man, half is Peter, and that's what this shot is. Half of it is the panicked and scared Peter crying, bloody, and the other half is Spider-Man. It's his mask. And when Peter sees this, he steels himself and he starts pushing up to get the building off of him. And what I really love the most about this scene is that when Peter starts off the scene, he starts saying, "Come on, Peter. Come on, Peter." And then as he gets stronger, as he starts pushing the building off of him, as he starts saving himself, as he starts becoming Spider-Man and doing what he needs to do, he starts going, "Come on, Spider-Man. Come on, Spider-Man. Come on, Spider-Man." And then he throws the building off of him, he grabs his mask, and he chases after the Vulture. It is such a good scene, and it is the birth of a superhero done correctly. Because all those 3 movies I mentioned before, like I said, they regress the character to then make them the character that you know. Spider-Man Homecoming never does that. He feels like the character you know, but then he's not doing the right thing 100% of the time until the end of the movie where he has this impactful moment that turns him into the character that you know that they should be. And I feel like they did it really, really freaking well. I love this scene. It is one of the most iconic Spider-Man scenes ever. It's up there with the What's Up Danger scene in Into the Spider-Verse and the train scene from Spider-Man 2. It is a top tier Spider-Man moment. I love it. So to fast track a little bit, Peter and the Vulture get into a fight on this Stark jet that's carrying a bunch of Avengers technology and alien technology, and the plane starts crashing. And this is another thing that I really love about Spider-Man Homecoming. Peter literally saves all of New York by stopping this plane from crashing into it and probably exploding from all of this alien technology. However, no one addresses that. A lot of superhero movies recently, like in the recent Black Widow, Eternals, and Shang-Chi, all of those movies, at one point or another, they bring up the fact that the hero is saving the world. They're fighting some sort of entity, or whatever's happening is going to destroy the world and change everything forever, and they end up stopping them. That does not happen in Homecoming. Peter sees the plane is about to crash into the middle of New York. He changes its course so it lands on a beach. That's it. He saves New York. He saves a tons of lives. Nobody says anything. Peter never looks at the plane about to crash and goes, "Oh no, it's about to crash into New York. I have to do something." And the Vulture never goes like, "Haha, this plane's about to crash into New York. Now what?" No, doesn't happen. He just saves everybody in New York, doesn't say anything about it. And what makes it even better is that Peter does not beat the Vulture in a fight. No, Adrian Toomes bodies Peter. The only reason that Peter wins is that because from all the damage of their fight up to this point, his wings are malfunctioning and they're about to explode. So instead of Peter just letting Adrian just fly off, explode, and die, no. Peter does everything in his power to save his life, which is something that Spider-Man would do and is fantastic. I said fantastic again. Shut up. Peter saves Adrian's life, which earns his respect. Because something I also really love, Peter never asks Adrian to not reveal his identity. He never looks at him as like, "Hey man, listen, you know who I am, and it'd be really bad if people found out that I'm Spider-Man." No, he doesn't do that. He just catches Adrian Toomes. He leaves a little note for Happy and Tony to find when they show up to pick up all of the Stark tech and alien technology. And Adrian gains the respect of Peter because he saved his life. He has an unreasonable respect for Peter Parker, so he's like, okay, I'm not going to reveal his identity, which is shown at the end of the movie where Vulture is in prison and Mac Gargan, who is someone that Peter was going the Vulture was going to do an arms deal with earlier, who, if you don't know, Mac Gargan is canonically in the comics the supervillain known as the Scorpion. So Mac is like, yo, heard through the grapevine that you know who Spider-Man is, so you trying to tell me so me and my boys can slice him up? And he's like, if I knew who Spider-Man was, he'd already be dead. And I'm like, yo, Adrian, I respect that. I like it. You didn't rat out Peter. I do enjoy that, and it works well with the story. Fantastic. And then after that, Peter, this is the part of the movie where I felt Peter and Tony should have had some sort of split with their characters, is that Peter gets taken to the new Avengers base. But before I get into this, there's a really funny scene that I know I'm messed up for thinking that this is funny. When Happy and Peter arrive at the Avengers base, Happy mentions that, yeah, they just finished remodeling this. And Peter's like, wow, this is so cool. And in my head, I just kept thinking about how Thanos blows up the entire Avengers base in Endgame, and it made me laugh. I know it's messed up, but I found it really funny. Anyway, back to the story. So Peter, he meets Tony. Tony's like, yeah, since you did good, I respect you now, and I want you to be an Avenger. We have you a room and everything like that. And Peter's like, nah, I think I'm just gonna stay a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Which, to be honest, I feel like they should have drifted apart here, because Tony, being a jerk the entire movie, he doesn't answer Peter's calls. Although he listens to the messages that Happy tells him, he doesn't answer Peter's calls. He never divulged vital information that could have gotten people killed to Peter. It's just, Tony's just such a jerk throughout this whole movie that I really feel like Peter at the end should have just been like, no, I don't want to be an Avenger. I respect everything that you've done for me, but I'm just going to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and I don't really need your help anymore. I appreciate everything you've done for me, though. And then just left. I really feel like Peter should have just abandoned Tony at that moment. The two of them are still close and everything like that. They don't have to hate each other, but I feel like Peter has grown as a character that he doesn't need Tony Stark anymore. That's just how I feel about it. But it's a nice scene. He refuses it. He leaves, and then I'm like, all right, cool. And then they have a joking scene afterwards where Peter's like, this was a test, wasn't it, Mr. Stark? And he's like, yeah, definitely. And then Peter leaves, and then Pepper walks out, and there's a room of reporters behind them that are waiting to see the reveal of Spider-Man as the new Avenger. And then she's like, did you guys screw this up? Where's the kid? And it's just he's like, well, Happy told him to wait in the car. She's like, are you serious? And like, no, it's fun. It's a cute scene. It's pretty funny. And yeah, that's it. I think that's all about Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, I will mention this now in case I forget about it next week when I do my review for Spider-Man Far From Home. A lot of people do not like Zendaya's portrayal of MJ. She isn't Mary Jane Watson. She's a new character. She's the MCU's take on Mary Jane Watson. I personally like her. Something that people have a huge issue with is that Far From Home, a lot of the premise of Far From Home is that Peter just wants to, get close to MJ so that they can start a relationship, which is fine. However, people complain that there isn't any build up to that relationship, which, have you guys not watched Homecoming? If you think that, because in Homecoming, almost every scene that MJ is in, she's fiending for Peter. Like every scene that she's in, she's like almost everywhere that Peter goes. She knows way too much about his schedule. And they even make a joke out of it when Peter's like, "Yeah, guys, I can't make it to the academic decathlon in DC. I'm sorry." Then MJ's just like, "Yeah, he's already quit robotics club and band," and they all look at her like, "Why do you, why do you know that?" And then she's just like, she awkwardly goes like, "What? I'm not stalking him or anything like that. I just happen to be observant." And then she like starts putting her face back in her book, and I'm just like, "Oh, okay, yeah, this girl, like she likes Peter. Okay, yeah, I get it. Makes perfect sense." But yet people complain that there's no build up to their relationship in Far From Home. So I wanted to mention that in case I forget about it when I end up doing the review for Far From Home next week. So, but yeah, I think that about wraps up Spider-Man: Homecoming. Oh, the post-credit scene for Spider-Man: Homecoming is hilarious, with Captain America basically trolling the audience, saying like, patience is a very important thing because usually there's a, impactful post-credit scene at the end of Marvel movies, but this one was just a troll, and I did really enjoy that. Um, oh, right, I can't. How can I forget about that? This is something that I definitely have to talk about more in Far From Home, but I will also bring it up here because it is. It starts at the end of this movie. Aunt May finding out that Peter is Spider Man. I had so much high expectations when she found that out because I don't think I mentioned this in the Amazing Spider-Man, but like they subtly hint that Aunt May knows that Peter's Spider-Man in the Amazing Spider-Man, but she doesn't bring it up to him. She just lets him continue doing what he's doing. In this, Aunt May just flat out finds out that Peter's Spider-Man, and she flips out at the end of this movie. It is the last scene of this movie. Peter like takes off his Spider-Man mask. He's like, "Yeah, life is good," and then Aunt May opens the door and she sees him. She's like, "What the?" And then it cuts to black, and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, that's cool." So that means there's going to be like some friction between Peter and Aunt May in the next Spider-Man movie because the two of them are at odds with each other. But no, it doesn't really happen. She kind of just accepts it. So I'll delve into that more into the next movie. But yeah, her finding out Peter Spider-Man at the end of this movie really set up high expectations. I remember me and my friend, we went to go see Spider-Man: Homecoming. When it was in theaters. And I remember the two of us were like, "Oh man, that's really cool. I can't wait to see what's going to happen in the next movie now that she knows." And it kind of just goes nowhere. But like I said, I'll delve into that more in the next video. So yeah, that will be the end of this review. Um, I already mentioned what I'm going to be reviewing next week. So hope you guys have a fantastic day. I'm the innocent villain, and remember, you are innocent until proven villainous, and I will see you hopefully next time.